So we live on a planet that has a number of peculiarities. And these peculiarities we have somehow rationalized, we have somehow come to terms with, or we have somehow diminished the difference between things, that these peculiar things that we have in our lives, in our culture, on our planet. So for example, we have computers, we have digital processors, we have microchips, which uses miniature scale technology and software, right, to create artificial intelligence. And on the other hand, we have gasoline vehicles, and we still use fire to cook our food, right? We still use toilets and sewers and toilet paper, and we have smartphones, we have satellites, we have space shuttles, and we still have bows and arrows, right? And so one of the things you start to think is, well, people have different preferences, right? There are reasons for all these things. But what if there's a different reason for all these things? What if this is evidence of something that we've been trying to figure out, right? One of the things, because we're always trying to find evidence to explain why the world is the way it is. We're trying to find evidence to justify we're living in a suppressed reality. We're trying to find evidence that the low vibration versus high vibration, high frequency. You have some people on this planet, they believe in a singular monotheistic God, and some people are atheists who don't believe in God. And both these people can be successful and healthy and happy, right? So as if God was not a prerequisite for anything, right? So we have these things, these peculiarities, I call them, that, religion, which has been around for thousands of years, and then you have the non-religious. You have the new religion. You have science versus religion. How can they coexist? Cooking food with fire. We still have farms. We grow our food, and yet we have computers, and we have genetics, and we have pharmaceuticals, which are tiny pills, right? And this, to me, is evidence that something was damaged on our timeline. This, to me, is evidence that our timeline has been damaged. So in my early research a number of years ago, I estimated that over the last 2,000 years, our timeline has been regressed about 200 years. About 200 years. And I did some kind of fringe mathematics to come to that estimation. But I looked at these peculiarities. The microwave oven versus the the barbecue and the smartphone versus the sewers and the toilets, and our level of education, you know, or the devout religious belief versus atheism. So I went back 2,000 years, and I estimated about 200 years, about 10%. Over the 2,000 years, we have regressed the flow of time by 200 years. And then, if some people recall, 6 years ago in 2011, because I study reality and I'm in touch with changes in reality, I noted a reality jump. I called it a time jump. And I made a video on this. There was a 5-year time jump in 2011. And that hasn't changed. I have not seen a change from that since then. So if you look at 200-year regression, right, time regression, and the 5-year jump, we're looking at, we are off by 205 years. So what does that mean? Well, look at it very simply. The smartphone is like a device from the future, right? If you think about it in terms of a science fiction movie. The smartphone is from the future. It's basically a 23rd century device. Because when you add, we're in 2017, if you add 205 years, that's the year 2222, which is basically the 23rd century. So what happened? What happened? What happens when you regress over a period of centuries? This wasn't instant. Period of centuries, you regress the flow of time. And so it's like you take a child, and when the child is 10 years old, you stick him in a closet or a box. You put the child in a box. And you open the thing to feed the child, and you take away the waste, and then you close the box or the closet. And what happens when you do that, the child doesn't grow up properly, because they don't have the same information, they don't have the same amount of exercise and movement, so they might not grow, they might remain small, and they have limited knowledge, limited thinking, they have childlike personality. They basically become regressed, repressed, right? Abnormal. So if we use that analogy for the earth, in some ways we have been, put in a box, and we have not progressed properly. We have not matured. And when you're in the closet for 2,000 years and you come out, there's a lot of things you missed, right? There's a lot of things you missed, and intellectually and emotionally and spiritually, you are not at the same time frame as everybody else. So this is one way for the master controllers to get ahead of the population, is you regress the population. You regress the population, and then you become more advanced, because everyone's been kept in a box, in a time box, time capsule, whatever term we want to use. I call it time regression, that we have our timeline has been regressed by 205 years. So we are actually living in the 23rd century, but we have the mindset of the 21st and even before. We still have religion, right? We shouldn't have religion. Religion was invented 3,000 years ago, and it was not meant to be used for 3,000 years, right? It's like you buy a television in 1950, and every time a new television comes out, you buy a new television because you want something better. When I was growing up, they came out with aerobics, right? And then they came up with jazzercise, and everyone went to jazzercise. And then they came up with that Bruce Lee was popular, and everyone started doing martial arts. And then they came up with kickboxing, and then they came up with yoga. And what people do naturally is they progress to the newest idea. But we don't find that, right? You don't find that in religion. You don't find that in cooking. We're still using fire to cook. The Neanderthals used fire to cook, right? We still hunt. We have bows and arrows, and we have machine guns, and we have laser weapons. We have satellite directed energy weapons. And we still have knives. We still have knives. Hunting knives. Which is from what? Is from the ancient time, from primordial, from the dinosaurs. So you have all of these peculiarities. And if you go through the list of the peculiarities, I think it provides evidence that there's been some kind of distortion, and it's a kind of thing that intellectually we don't know how to process, right? Because even now you probably have never thought about it in these terms. You've never thought about, yeah, we use gasoline engines, but we have the technology for electric cars. We're still using electricity by wire electricity, and people like Tesla 100 years ago had invented wireless electricity. We have computers, we have internet, we have the internet, we have like infinite knowledge without wires. Basically, it's the substitute for God. We don't pray to God, we pray to the internet, we pray to Google. Google, I am having trouble with my ex. Google, I have this illness. You don't ask God. We used to ask God. Before it was like, dear God, my child is sick. Tell me, what should I do? Now we go to Google. Dear Google, my child has these symptoms. What might be the disease, dear Google? And then all of the angels, right? The websites and the experts and the video, right? Go to YouTube. Oh, angels and archangels, tell me how to fix my tire on my car. The angels come down. This is how you fix a car. This is the fastest way to fix a car tire. And fix a car tire in 5 minutes. Archangel. We haven't progressed our understanding of things because we have been repressed. We have been regressed. And when you regress the flow of time, you get these distortions. You get the psychological distortions, you get these illusions, you get this old programming, right? old program, such that when I say, you know, if I were to suggest to a devout worshiper of any religion that the internet is probably your God, because you're using the internet to ask questions and you're praying and you're learning, they say, so no, I still need my religion, right? So we don't have, right? So the child has been in the closet for 2,000 years, right? And we've been slowly regressed. Our ancestors, our forebearers, and now we carry that corruption. We carry that dislocation of data. We carry these peculiarities. Because my thinking is we are actually living in the 23rd century. And I have evidence. There's a computer, there's the internet, there's a smartphone, there's a space shuttles. There's this evidence. There's the fact that there's atheists. Atheists are from the 23rd century. They've been in the 23rd century. There's no God. Look, I can live a happy life. Right? That's my evidence. People always say, where's your evidence? Where's the scientific calculation? Where's the official stamp? The evidence is there's a smartphone in your pocket. I'm making a video. I'm making a holographic projection on a tiny device, and I'm uploading it into space, into heaven, and you are watching it in the present. That is evidence. That is called hard evidence. And I have an issue with people asking me for hard evidence of stuff, because I give you hard evidence. You cook with fire and you use a smartphone. These two should not coexist. But they do, Paris, they do. Because your brain cannot process, cannot repair the damage that was done to the timeline. The damage was done to the timeline. So we can go through the list. I've pointed some of the key ideas. If you look at it, go through the list. Old thinking, old tech versus new thinking, new tech. So we're living in the 23rd century. There were, I think, over the centuries, key dates where the timeline was severely damaged. And it might have been repaired along the way, but we still carry 2 centuries of regression. So it might have been damaged more, and I think it was repaired or fixed. So we're still within the boundaries. So we can accept computing technology and the internet alongside religion, right? And cooking with fire. And so one particular date I want to add, one particular date is 1985. I think in 1985 there was an attack on the timeline, a serious attack. There's always different attacks, hacks of the timeline. In 1985, I think it was quite serious. And that led to a major diversion, change of the trajectory. So if people remember, the 80s looked very promising, looked very positive, looked very inspirational. The 80s were great. And then something happened. I think in 1985, there was an attack on the timeline, a serious attack. And that caused a major shift. And that was because whoever did it wanted to control the planet, and to control the planet, you damage the timeline, you shift everything. And that probably led us, to some of the tragedies and the wars and the catastrophes that we've experienced. In recent years, in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of updates and repairs. So we're coming back. There's been a lot of technical work on the timeline. And we're seeing this in the field, right? New discoveries, new sciences, new thinking, the awakening. All of this is because the timeline is being repaired. As the timeline is being repaired, we have to repair ourselves. The understanding of our incarnation, why we came here, our programming, who we are, what is the nature of reality, what is the nature of God. Think karma. I talk a lot about karma because it's very important that if you've been disconnected from your karmic path, your karmic debt, your karmic obligations, and the timeline gets fixed, then those become more prominent. You remember things, your memory, right? Your memory comes back, your obligations come back, and you have to repair those, right? So we are interconnected with reality, and as reality is repaired, we have to repair ourselves, and we remember things. So the damage kind of separated us. It kind of it fractured our collective consciousness. And as it gets repaired, we're forced now to synthesize all of those disparate elements. And while we call it mental illness and depression and new diseases, maybe it's just the timeline is being put together again, and our consciousness, our minds, is not be able to understand it, and we don't have these kinds of discussions in the mainstream, and we don't have the science for the time. There's no timeline science, right? So we don't understand it. We just look at it from, I'm sick, I don't feel well, here's my smartphone, and we call it diseases and illnesses and strange things, but maybe it's something else, or maybe other things are going on a much more advanced scale. And in timeline, I think if you think about film, when they release a film, let's say they make a film and something happens, the director gets booted off, and the studio comes in and they make some changes to the film, right? They change the timeline. They change the cut, they edit it, they cut it different, and they make a theatrical cut, which is not the director's original version, maybe, because there was a creative difference. And so the theatrical cut, let's say it's not very good, and it doesn't work, and it's not successful. And then later on, years later, there's a restored footage, right? And there's a restored version using the original footage. And they make a new cut, a new edition. And that is closer to what the director thought. And then finally, years later, decades later, the director makes a director's cut, right? So now you've got a movie that's got a theatrical cut, it's got a revised edition, and it's got a director's cut. So if you think about that in terms of our timeline, is that, the original timeline, we got the theatrical version, and it's not good. And it was revised, and it's better, but still it's got problems, these peculiarities. And now we're working on the original timeline, right? We want to get back to the timeline. I think when we understand that we are in the 23rd century, when we change our calendars, is when we've repaired. And that could take years, right? Many years. So we have different versions of reality, and as they change reality, the timeline, we get different effects in the field of reality, the field of existence. Things come up and things happen. And they're always trying to change it back, right? There's a catastrophe, there's some strange event. They're always trying to damage that flow. And then there are people who are trying to fix that flow, to correct that flow. And when we're flowing properly, we will find that we are in the 23rd century, right? And that maybe we won't cook with fire anymore. Maybe we won't have hunting knives. You know? Maybe we won't be wiping our ass in the future.